Jessie Blodgett. And we are going back to the summer of 2013 when 19-year-old Jessie's life was really taking shape. Everything was going according to plan. She was a sophomore at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. She was offered a talent scholarship for her excellence in music education. Meanwhile, she had started her own business teaching the piano, voice lessons, and violin to other people around Hartford, Wisconsin. She, in fact, gathered 26 students in just a 2-month period. Jessie had a long-term vision for her life: to become a high school or university choir director, to affect 100 young lives a year for 40 years, using music to impact people and change the world around her. And she was completely serious about that last part. She wanted to affect the world through music and make it better, and I love that. She was born in the Atlanta suburb of Marietta, Georgia. Fun fact, I lived there once. To her parents, Buck and Joy Blodgett. Jessie thought that everyone around her loved her and that the world was hers to explore. And truthfully, she loved everyone right back. Her eyes opened pretty early in her teenage years, and she did experience some darkness in the world as well. But it's said that at a young age she became outraged by bullying and the unfairness of it, and she developed a strong social conscience and a personal philosophy. She stood proudly and doggedly for her causes and became a fierce defender of animal rights, environmentalism, sustainability, social justice, and ultimately, and ironically, ending violence against women. To say that Jessie was intelligent is quite the understatement, according to her parents and other classmates. When she was in kindergarten and her classmates were practicing the words like the and off, Jessie knew how to spell words like metamorphosis and anesthesiologist. She pursued activism in her spare time. She spoke out against animal abuse and domestic violence whenever she could. She always came back to music, though. She wrote songs, and one of her friends said she was just brilliant at writing music. But Jessie wasn't the only exceptional talent to come out of Hartford. Enter her good friend and classmate, Dan Bartlett. Dan and Jessie sat next to each other every day in school, all the way through high school. He was described as a gifted violinist. He was the first chair, and Jessie was right beside him as second chair. A friend of Dan and Jessie described Dan as hilarious. He was always funny, really outgoing, and making jokes. He was very smart, and this person named Jacqueline said that she always admired their friendship. Jessie and Dan also shared a love for the stage, and on paper they had the makings of an arts-loving couple. But they tried that, and it did not work. They dated for 3 or 4 months freshman year of high school, but Dan ended up breaking up with Jess. They were better as friends, and after high school, they went away drop some laundry off in Jessie's room before heading to work. Jessie's dad, Buck, had already left for the day, and Jessie was asleep in her bed and everything seemed fine. But just 4 hours after that, Jessie's mom returns home for her lunch break, and the house was quiet. Joy just thought that her daughter was sleeping in. She was a teenager on break, and for some reason she goes to wake Jessie up, and she gets mad because Jessie is not responding to her. She goes into Jessie's room and she can't understand why Jessie is just not waking up, and then she touches her, and Jessie is cold. Joy calls 911 and she says, "My daughter is blue. I went to wake her up. I just got home from lunch and she won't wake up." 911 asks, "Is she breathing?" Joy says, "No, I don't think so." Jessie is unresponsive, covered up in her own bed. 911 asks, "Okay, ma'am, do you know how to do CPR?" Joy cries out, "Jessie, she's cold, she's cold." 911 asks, "She's cold?" Joy responds in what sounded like complete anguish, "She's cold. Oh my God." You can just hear the fear in her voice as she tries to process what in the world is going on. She rolls her daughter over and she sees these ligature marks, and she relates this to 911. She says her pants are all wet and she's got like strangulation marks. 911 says, "Strangulation marks?" Joy responds, "Yeah, that's what it looks like. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on." After that, amazingly, the 911 dispatcher puts her on hold and alerts EMS. They come, but it is already too late for Jessie. Buck Blodgett was at work the Monday that his wife found their only child, Jessie, apparently strangled to death in her bedroom. And by the time he gets home, investigators already have Jessie cordoned off. They wouldn't let him upstairs. They wouldn't let him see her. They wouldn't let him touch her. He says, "I couldn't say goodbye. I couldn't tell her I loved her. I couldn't tell her I was sorry for not being there when she needed her dad." And that just absolutely broke my heart. Hartford Police Detective Richard Thickens was one of the first investigators on the scene that day, and he describes it like this. He says, "We found Jessie on the floor. Very obvious marks on her neck, marks on her wrist, and there are also faint marks that could be binding marks. At this point, I believed we had a homicide on our hands." Jessie's mom tells detectives that when she found her, her hair and her clothes were wet. This is a sign to them that the killer may have spent extra time with his victim. Detective Thickens says, "He staged her body. I believe he washed her, placed her back in the bed, and covered her up. There were no signs of forced entry, so it led us to believe it was someone who knew this house." But who knew Jessie's movements so intimately and would use that knowledge to end her life? Police didn't have to look far to find their first suspects. They think about that gas party that wrapped up on Sunday night and the concerns she had with those men that were there. And they saw the concerns that she wrote about in her journal. Apparently, this man actually pulled her into his lap, according to some of her friends. And whoever this man was, he hadn't shown up for work on Monday, which is a pretty significant concern to the police. I didn't get his name, but Jessie wrote about in her diary. Now, this is where the story takes a little turn. What the police in Hartford don't realize is authorities in the neighboring town of Ridgefield were already zeroing in on their suspect, but for an entirely different reason, an entirely different attack on a completely different victim. It happened just 3 days before Jessie Blodgett's murder. A young woman named Melissa Etzler was walking her dog at a local park when she was tackled from behind by a man with a knife. Washington County Sheriff's Detective Joel Clausing interviewed Melissa in the hospital shortly after her assault. Her emotions were still raw, as were her wounds from fighting off her attacker. Detective Clausing said, "I got down to the hospital and I started talking to her. She couldn't write because her hand was all caught up, so I got a recorded statement." Melissa tells Detective Clausing she was getting ready to leave the park and she was startled by the sound of footsteps behind her. "So I look back and I laugh and I say, 'Oh, you scared me,' because I thought he was just some friendly guy. And then I turn around again because I hear him coming at me and I see this knife in his hand." She continues her story a little later when investigators take her back to this park to reenact the crime. After that, she said, "It was fight or die. The next thing I remember, I'm on the ground and he's on top of me. I'm face down. I'm holding onto the knife and we're fighting for it. I had the blade and that's how I got cut. And suddenly he says, 'Can I just go?' After she disarmed him, he asked if she could leave and she said no, which I think is so brave. She said, 'No, you're not gonna take this knife and leave. I'm taking it with me.' And she kept the knife. It's actually in her car at the time of this interview. It was a fish fillet knife. He couldn't get it from her. He was trying and he just couldn't get it out of her grip. And he just asks her, 'Can I leave?' And she's like, 'Well, you're the one on top of me.' She says after that, the man ran off, but she remembered every detail of her perpetrator. White male, 18 to 20 years of age, 6'2", 210 pounds, light blonde hair, but very fair skin, and he was wearing plaid shorts. Detective Gosling said Melissa was the best witness he'd ever had in his career. She described where this man was parked in the parking lot and what kind of vehicle he was driving within a couple of years of the make and model. Dark blue minivan, Dodge Caravan. Based on Melissa's description of the suspect, police release a composite sketch to the media, and they expected a bunch of calls saying, "I know who this guy is," but they didn't get anything. But when they circulate the near-perfect description of the van, they were approached by a Deputy Meyer from their department. He came up and he says, "I saw a car parked in that very same spot a couple of months ago. But even better," he says, "I found you a license plate." And they ran it. They ran it that very day. And he had run it previously, so he looked it back up. He found this plate and they get a name. And they focus these two mysteries in two separate towns down to one very surprising suspect. Now, the owner of this van did not match the description that Melissa gave the police, but they had a son. Guess who it is? Detective Joel Clausling was able to track down this license plate, though, like I said, it comes back as a middle-aged couple. But when they question him, they find out they have a son Same time, back in the town of Hartford, Jessie's loved ones have filled her family's home. They were sitting in a circle around the living room, and people were sharing memories of Jessie and just crying and hugging and having a moment. And among those people was Jessie's old artistic collaborator, fellow actor, singer-songwriter, Dan Bartlett. According to their friend that I mentioned earlier, Jacqueline, at this point, Dan had done most of the talking. He was just talking and talking and talking at this memorial about Jessie. And he was about to do a lot more talking. All of a sudden, he gets this phone call. And he takes it. And he's not upset or surprised. And he says, "So, okay, I'll be right there." And he hangs up the phone. On the other end of that phone was Detective Gosling. Daniel Bartlett was the son of the couple with the van. They told him they needed to talk to him. They asked him where he was, and he said he was at Jessie Blodgett's vigil. And even though it wasn't his case, he knew who Jessie Blodgett was, and Detective Gosling says, I get off the phone, I look at Detective Walsh, and I say, he never asked me what this was about. How many people get called by a detective, asked to meet, and they don't say, what's going on? Why do I need to meet you? Dan Bartlett never said it. Apparently, at this point, he didn't have much to say to his friends back at the Blodgett house either. He kind of looks at everyone and says, I got called to the police station. Of course, at this point, nobody knows about the attack on Melissa Etzler. He's in Jessie's house, and Joy is like, Dan, don't worry, they're gonna talk to all of Jessie's friends. And little did they know at the time why they were talking to Dan. The detective's conversation with Dan is recorded, and I have the transcript, and I'm gonna read it to you now. Detective says, all right, do you know what this is about? Dan replies, no. This is about an incident that Detective Walsh and I are investigating that happened last Friday. Okay. Where were you at again? Dan says, I was at a house in Hartford at Jessie Blodgett's house. Detective asks, is that the girl that just passed? Dan, yeah, we're visiting her parents. Detective Gosling starts making small talk and he asks, well, what happened to her? Dan says, I think someone sexually assaulted and murdered her. This is in the first 2 minutes of the interview, but it proves to be one of the most significant moments because, well, hold on. Gosling wants to talk to him about Melissa, so they start asking about his history. Where were you? Were you at the park last Friday? Dan says no. They ask him any park, and he says, I don't believe so, which, strange. How do you not know? Dan denies knowing anything about Melissa's assault, and then something catches Detective Gosling's eye. What happened to your arm? He asks. Where? There, on your elbow. Oh, I fell, probably. Let's see your hands. Go like this. What's on your thumb? I got stabbed with a corkscrew at work. It was like a puncture wound, and they asked him what happened, and he said, it happened at work. It went straight through my thumb. And detectives ask if we check with their employer, would they say, yeah, do you still have a job? Dan replies, no. A detective says, okay, yeah, that's what I thought. Dan Bartlett didn't really have a job at all. Every day he would says, I wanted to scare someone. He then tells detectives that since he dropped out of college, he's felt frightened of life and just wanted someone else to feel the same. They get a confession complete with motive, but at that time they didn't really even need it. At the park, they found Dan's blood on multiple items. They found a roll of heating duct tape that matched the tape in Dan's house. Plus, they had their star witness, Elissa. They had her do a lineup, and right when she saw his face, she's like, yeah, that's him, 100%. And they arrest him, and now they discuss, do you think he had anything to do with Jessie Blodgett? You know, do you think he's good for murder? And the reason they wonder that goes back to the first few minutes of the interview when Dan said he thought someone assaulted and murdered her. It was pretty significant because at the time, police didn't even know that she had been sexually assaulted. Only the killer would know that. So while Dan Bartlett sits in jail for the assault on Melissa in the park, detectives covering that case share what they know with detectives investigating Jessie Blodgett's murder. They did some searches on his computer and they find a lot of really kind of bondage-y stuff. There was a lot of, the detective described it as dark stuff, including an internet search on spree killers and several other serial killer searches. But it didn't end there. They found searches for snuff films that actually matched the series of events in Jessie's room. In the movie, after strangling her, he washes her off. And remember, one of the things that Joy Blodgett noticed was Jessie was placed back in her bed, covered up, and her hair was wet. So detectives go back to Dan and they're like, alright, we want to talk about Jessie Blodgett. I understand that you were friends with her, right? But this time, Dan is a little more careful not to incriminate himself. When they ask what he thinks happened to Jessie, he says, I have no idea. He does admit that he reconnected with his one-time girlfriend and he had been at Jessie's house a lot in the past few weeks before her murder. He even says that he had a good reason to hide that fact, but it wasn't anything nefarious. They had started kissing and they were on the couch and she asked if he wanted to go up to her bedroom. He said they had rekindled their romantic relationship, but they hadn't made it public because he was dating someone else. But detectives are suspicious, and the entire time that they're talking to him, they said he made it look like he was crying, but he never shed a single tear. As for Dan's whereabouts on the day of Jessie's murder, he says he was driving around in his parents' van, pretending to be at work. He left the house, he'd gone to a couple different parks, and he ended up at Woodlawn Park in the city. When they ask him around what time, he says about 10 or so. When they ask him what he was doing, he says, I was reading and trying to write. It's an airtight alibi, he says. But when it comes to what he's trying to write, he tells detectives it's a series of stories. And a young girl, not unlike Jessie, who would eventually be murdered. The main character's name is even Jessica. So he admits to killing this fictional character, Jessica, but not so much for Jessie. Detectives ask him, can you help us out? Can you get us some closure? And Dan says, I wish I could. He continues to deny any involvement. But as detectives continue to press him, he gets a little less teary. In fact, he gets downright defensive. You're making me very uncomfortable, he says. much beyond that. I don't see how this is helpful. I would like to have a lawyer if we're going to talk anymore. So he didn't confess anything. This interview's over. And as for his alibi, they get video of the park at Woodlawn. And sure enough, there's Dan. He was at the park the morning that Jessie was killed. So then you start thinking, have investigators been too quick to pin a murder on an easy suspect, one who'd already confessed to another crime? Jessie's parents think so, especially because Dan Bartlett spent hours grieving with them after Jessie's murder. He was there at their house, they hugged him. They were telling the police that it wasn't him, that this was a good guy. But Jessie's parents were wrong. They were fooled by Daniel Bartlett's act. As it turns out, his own alibi would be his undoing. Back at the park, police discover the dark side of Daniel. They go to the trash bins at Woodlawn Park. They take out all the trash, and inside of it they find a cereal box. In this cereal box is a ball gag, ligatures, and alcohol wipes. The rope that they find in the trash perfectly lines up with the ligature marks on Jessie's neck. And then they search his house. They find the exact same rope in his garage. And remember the tape investigators found on the fence that matched the tape he dropped during Melissa's assault. Incredibly, a full week after Jessie Blodgett's murder, detectives take a second look at the scene to find the exact same tape under her bed. And Dan's fingerprints were on it. Based on the evidence, investigators believe they know exactly why that tape was there. He tied her up, he gagged her, and he taped the gag into her mouth so it wouldn't come out. They found both Jessie and Dan's DNA on those ligatures, and they found Dan's DNA under Jessie's fingernails. And they found DNA that matched that he had assaulted her. After that, it was pretty hard for anyone to deny that the Dan they thought they knew, was someone else entirely. They described him as a chameleon. He was able to present himself to the world in a very different light than who he actually is. Good qualities for an actor, lethal qualities for a killer. Even without a confession, Daniel Bartlett is charged with first-degree intentional homicide of his friend. But there's still one pretty giant question hanging in the air. Why would he do this? Jessie's dad says, I don't really like labels personally, but I think he's a sociopath. I think he has no empathy. I think he's brilliant and talented, but like many sociopaths, they're calculating. They learn how to fit, how to blend in. Based on the evidence, which included, like I said, a lot of disturbing searches on his computer, the prevailing theory is that Dan killed Jessie just to satisfy a really sick urge. They believe that she was a convenient target. He knew where she was going to be. He knew no one would be home. He wanted to kill someone, and she was available. Dan's trial didn't last long. He was found guilty. Detective Joel Clausing said, I think he's a bad person, and he's right where he should be. And that's what everyone else says about him when he's found guilty. But what would Dan have to say? Would he finally confess to Jessie's crime? In court, he says, Buck, Joy, her parents, I can't give you the answers you're looking for. This jumpsuit I'm wearing, the shackles that they put me in, do not make me guilty. Well, no, it was the mountain of evidence they found against you, Dan, but whatever. But like an actor delivering his final monologue, he prattles on. I can't prove I'm innocent to anyone, not even myself. I can't prove that the son I haven't seen was sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole. When it was Jessie's father's turn to speak in court, you might think he's going to express anger, hatred, rage, any feeling that the parent of a murdered child would feel. Instead, he turns to his daughter's killer and he says, "I forgive you, as I have every single day since we found out it was you. I believe that there's good and bad in every one of us, and I do not demonize or vilify you." He told reporters, "I don't want you to think I'm living in some sugar-coated bubble, and I don't have pain or anger." At the same time, stronger than that was this inexplainable peace and forgiveness, and a sense that everything is okay. I don't know how to explain it, but because Buck, he's seen the impact that his forgiveness has had on others, he decided to honor his daughter's memory by starting an organization called Love is Greater Than Hate Project. It's a non-profit, and their dual mission is to end violence against girls and women, and to have all people inspired, educated, and motivated to choose love over hate. It is what Jessie would have wanted, what she lived for, and what she wrote about in the music that lives on after her death. Don't get me wrong, Buck says, I will never be okay with what Dan did to our Jessie. But Jessie's life and death for me are bringing light into this world. My life is getting better all the time. Love is greater than hate. I researched this case. I actually found out about it. I read an article that said something about star-crossed lovers in a play or something. I thought they were in the same play, but they were not. He was in Bye Bye Birdie, which, if you've never seen it, it's sort of like a play about when Elvis was sent off to, when he was drafted. Conrad, I think is the name of. Anyway, I don't know if Dan played the lead, it doesn't matter. But he must have been talented to convince all of these people that were actually going to the police and telling the police, no, there's no way this kid did it. He was here mourning with us. He was her friend. They dated. That to me is like the ultimate sign of a sociopath, like a crazy. I think about Ted Bundy and how he had all these women convinced, and he tricked them into coming with him and all of these things. And I think this man, if he hadn't been so careless and caught so easily, could have escalated to that level, because he just showed no empathy for what he had done. Like, you're scared of life, and so you want to make someone else frightened, so you attack a lady with a knife. No, that's not what it was. You were gonna assault her. What your reasonings were behind that, I don't really know, and why you decided to try to assault her in the middle of a park, I don't really know. That's just crazy to me, and I think that it is absolute, just complete lack of care to go into someone's home, attack them completely so perversely, to tie her up and gag her and put the tape, and then to wash her and put her back in bed to make her look as though she's sleeping. I mean, her parents, these are the people that are going to discover her body after what you've done, and you pose her like this. Maybe for just one second, let's look at the other side. Maybe he didn't mean to kill her. Maybe he just meant to assault her and she died because he gagged her and put tape over. Maybe she suffocated by accident. But I don't believe just living her life, and she was advocating for all of these amazing things: domestic violence, animals. She was starring in plays and shows and writing all this music, and she was so talented. And I think that this guy, who didn't know where his life was going, didn't know what he was doing, didn't have a job, dropped out of college, was jealous. And I think that he decided to end her life so that she couldn't make him look any worse. I couldn't find out why he dropped out of college. I have to think that maybe another assault potentially happened, only this girl, like many girls, was afraid to report it. If that's the case, I really hope she would come forward so that we could get this guy on more charges. But so many women are afraid to report that they've been assaulted because of how they think people will look at them. It's such a stigma, even in 2021, that you just don't report that stuff, and it makes me so mad. You can do it anonymously. You don't have to stand on the street corner with a megaphone. Anyway, I just think that Jessie deserved so much more than this. And I can't imagine what her life and career would have been if this man had not snuffed it out before she could really start. She was only 19. There was so much more of her life to live. Anyway, thank you guys so much for joining me here on my channel tonight. If you don't know, I have a Patreon. It is Patreon Appreciation Month over there, so they're getting a video every week. They're voting on what video I'm going to do at the end of the month. Hopefully today, it might be later on this week. It's really hard to do. I'm designing more merchandise, and I have plans for 10 total different phrases. One of you asked for mugs. I'm going to do that. I don't think I can do ink pens on Teespring, but I'm going to try for you. Please let me know if there's something that you would like to see on a t-shirt or a mug or whatever, like a phrase or something like that, so that I could try to do that for you. I did a couple, and no one has sent me any pictures. I know that one person bought one, and she told me about it, but I haven't seen any pictures. I want to see, guys. Like, I want to see. I have my own, but, it's not the same. Anyway, let's see. All of those are linked in the description box down below. The Patreon and the merchandise. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you have any suggestions for other cases you would like to see, please drop them in the comments down below. We are so close to 5,000 subscribers here on my channel, so please like and subscribe if you haven't already. It really